thanks to Confluence and Converge for hosting us and for putting on this event. So we're talking about the importance of arts and culture in building a city. And the structure is I'm first going to get us started and kind of frame the topic a bit. Then we're going to have each of our panelists talk a bit about the work that they do and how it connects to this topic. Then we're going to have a little conversation amongst ourselves, and then we're going to throw it open to you. And I want to make sure that we leave time. We have a great big crowd here, and I'm sure you all have great ideas and great questions. So I don't want to dominate things. I want to leave as much time as possible for all of you. So first off, at least to me it goes without saying, but I really think that arts and culture is shaping Denver for the 21st century. You know, when I first came here, and just a little background, I came here to serve as president and CEO of the Bonfils Stanton Foundation just a little over a year ago, so I'm a relatively new arrival, and you know, I would hear this phrase often of, well, you know, Denver's not a cow town anymore, and that phrase is still out there, and it probably hasn't been one for decades, but it certainly isn't one now. I mean, this is, you know, it's one thing that I think you can see a city to some extent with fresh eyes when you're a relatively new arrival to it, and this is an extraordinary city. And I think arts, culture, creative enterprise are really driving sort of the DNA of the city right now, and that's what we're really going to try and get into. And I think one thing that has become an increasing focus of mine is not looking at arts and culture in a vacuum, not looking at it through the prism of nonprofit arts organizations, obviously including artists and how we look at arts and culture, but also including this larger community. And this is why it's great to be here in a space like this, to be doing a session hosted by Confluence, because this is what they're all about, is to be part of this larger community of creators, of makers, of doers. I think the arts are part of the local food movement. I think the arts are part of the microbreweries and microdistilleries, the people that are doing tech startups. It's all kind of a soup of creativity and innovation, and everything feeds everything else. It's why the city has become one of the top attractors of millennials in the country, because people are attracted by that sort of soup. I think that kind of ecosystem also includes transportation, and having mass transit, and having bike share, and having a system that sort of, you know, might not be perfect yet, but Denver is really thinking about those things. And again, I think arts and culture is part of this larger mix. It's also part of diversity as well. Denver is an increasingly diverse city, as frankly the country is, and many cities around the country are. And arts and culture are a critical component of how we come to understand other cultures, other people. And I think that's also a kind of critical role of arts and culture. You know, I'll talk a little bit about the foundation because I think it's relevant. This foundation, which has been around for a long time, just went through a process a couple of years ago of deciding to focus 100% of its grant making on arts and culture. We had, and that's an extraordinary thing. I think that deserves a round of applause. We are actually the only private foundation that I know of that's gone that route, and in recent years. And the reason that happened is that our foundation looked at the philanthropic landscape and saw, particularly after the recession, many foundations putting the arts into a nice to have but not need to have category, saying, you know, with all the challenges that we have, and it gets to the point that you made so, you know, eloquently, well, what do the arts really do for you? What do they do for jobs? And it's so much more complex than that. And I would argue actually an arts job is a job, the same way that a construction job is a job. You know, we went through this when the Recovery Act was being debated, and there was an attempt to take all recovery funding for the arts out of the recovery bill, somehow, you know, under the impression that a construction job was a real job and an arts job was not really a real job. And in fact, arts jobs are real jobs. But we saw arts and culture becoming more and more important to this city and to kind of the DNA of the city, and we saw a critical need for funding there. And we felt that we could be more strategic. Not that all these other areas are, are not important, but I would argue, and perhaps we'll get into this in our conversation, the arts are actually a really important tool and strategy for addressing all these other challenges. So it's not that we're taking money and putting it into the arts and not putting it into poverty or putting it into homelessness or putting it into all these other things, but that in fact, what the arts can do can actually be a really successful strategy in helping to address some of these other challenges. And I want to make the point as well, we're not really going to focus on economic impact tonight. I'm not saying the arts don't have an economic impact, but that's talked about a lot. And in fact, this Friday, there's going to be a great session that the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts is going to be releasing new data on economic impact. And we can have that conversation on Friday and beyond about the data on economic impact and jobs. But I think here we want to talk about all these other ways in which the arts have an impact. And some of it is indirectly or directly related to economic impact. Increasingly, business attraction, employee attraction. I talked a little bit about millennials, but generationally, people who are not my generation, I would like to think sometimes, my staff sometimes says I'm the token millennial on the staff because I actually tweet and ride my bicycle to work and all of those things. Stereotypes of a much younger person. But in fact, and I see this, I have a number of younger brothers, and I see it even in their behavior. As you get into younger demographic age groups, and many of you are in the room here, so maybe this resonates with you, people make decisions about where they want to live first, and then find a job. It's not, it's about lifestyle, it's about a choice of where you want to live, what kind of people you want around you, and you trust that hopefully you'll find a job in that community. And I think Denver has tremendous assets in that area. Of course, arts education, critically important. The role that arts and culture play, and I'll talk a little bit about this in building a 21st century workforce. And it's not just about getting better grades. It's about creativity, it's about collaboration, it's about understanding other cultures, understanding the concept of no right answer, which is increasingly the world that we live in. There are lots of different answers to a question, not just one. Building social cohesion in neighborhoods, connecting people across race, class, and culture, creative placemaking, and actually there's this whole debate about the term creative placemaking, and one of the conversations around it is maybe we should call it placekeeping, because the role of arts and culture in making a place implies there was not a place there already, and generally you're in a neighborhood that is a place already where people live there, and we want to, again we'll talk about this, we want to get away from that perception of arts and culture as being about gentrification, which it unfortunately sometimes can be, but doesn't have to be. Cultural tourism, very important. And I want to also raise the idea of informal arts and personal practice. And what that means is, when we've talked about the arts in the past, we've often tended to focus it on nonprofit arts organizations and what are they doing. But in fact, when you reframe the question and incorporate all the ways in which arts and culture are part of people's lives, you're capturing church choirs, you're capturing all the aging rock and rollers out there who may have a corporate job but have a garage band. And that's a phenomenon. And there are so many people out there where the arts, if you define it that way, are a part of their everyday life. But if you ask them, are the arts a part of your life with a capital A, where it's about, do you go to traditional cultural organizations, they might say, oh no, that's not relevant to me. So I think it's also really important that we kind of reframe how we define what the arts are. And I'm not gonna, this is not a sort of PowerPoint, I'm not gonna go into great detail on this, but I just thought it might be helpful to sort of name a few, relatively recent studies that talk about this. One is the Knight Foundation's Soul of the Community study that they did actually 3 years in a row because they were so surprised at the results, which was they found, this was basically looking to see what drives community attachment, what makes people connected to the neighborhood or city where they live. And what they found was that the three top drivers were social offerings, so that includes the arts, but also social clubs, bars and restaurants, other basically places where people gather, places that bring people together outside of their house with their neighbors. 50% Physical beauty, so this includes parks, it includes the built environment, architecture, things that make their community aesthetically beautiful. And openness to other people, not being a closed community. These things rated higher across all 3 years and all 8 communities they studied than taxes, education, all of the crime, things you would think people would rate way up at the top. These other things, actually, when people were asked these questions, what makes you feel connected to your community, these things rated highest. The second study that I thought I sort of mentioned, because it's actually pretty profound, was done by a guy named James Catterall, who's a researcher at UCLA, or at least he used to be UCLA, I don't know if he's still there, but he did a kind of groundbreaking study on the impact of integration of the arts into education back about 15 years ago, and you know, corrected in the study for class issues, because often those studies that would find, oh, arts education has this powerful impact. Well, it turns out all those kids getting great arts education are in schools that are in wealthy communities that have wealthy PTAs, and the kids are getting violin lessons at home. And when you say it's having this powerful impact, well, really, it's about, you know, the advantages that these kids have being from a background where they're getting that kind of reinforcement. And what he found was this very, very strong correlation between, you know, integrated high-quality arts education and achievement, academic achievement. And often the impact on academic achievement was sort of indirect in that it made kids think going to school was cool, so it made them want to go to school because they loved going to school because of band or because of something else. But then what he did is go to those same kids, and this was thousands of kids, 15 years later. And what he found was that those same kids, 15 years later, compared to the control group of kids, were, frankly, were happier citizens. They voted at a higher level, they volunteered at a higher level, they were more likely to have jobs that they were happy in, they were more likely to be in personal relationships they were happy in. So it wasn't just about, gee, they scored better on the SAT. It was about this lifelong impact that it had on who they were as human beings. Also, the Dana Foundation, which actually no longer supports the arts, unfortunately, but they used to, and they funded a lot of research on the impact of the arts on the brain and brain development, especially in early childhood education. And what they found was a powerful connection between kids that really were actively engaged in the making and learning of art at very young ages, at the preschool ages, and things that became hardwired into their brain that made it easier for them to learn as they became older. And finally, there was a study done by a professor at Wharton and an economist from the Federal Reserve that looked at the correlation between the things that attract leisure travelers. So if you look at all the things that make somebody want to visit a place, it's arts and culture, it's parks, it's waterfront, it's aesthetic beauty, it's a lot of the same things that the Knight Foundation found. The same things that attract leisure travelers actually drove the economy of those cities. The same things that attracted leisure travelers attracted employees. It made people want to live in a city. And actually what the study concluded was that economic development agencies should be taking all their money that's now used to sweeten the pot to attract businesses and actually build their arts and culture sector. That in turn would then attract the workers that would in turn attract the businesses, the way our world operates today. And what they found was a correlation between these qualities in cities and GDP growth, which was the exact same thing that the Knight Foundation found. This exact correlation between the cities that had creative, vibrant communities were the cities that actually had the strongest GDP. That's kind of my sort of framing. And now, what I wanted to do was ask each of the panelists to take, and maybe we'll start with you, Jovan. Take 5 minutes or so, could be 10 minutes. Talk about could be 1 minute, whatever you're comfortable with, and just talk about your work with Slam Nuba and particularly how it fits into this idea of the role that arts and culture plays in building a a neighborhood, a city.
All those facts, jeez. Murph Griffin, eat your heart out, man. Yeah, so again, my name is Jovan, and I'm lucky enough to be the director of a fantastic poetry organization in the city called Slam Nuba. We do have a callback that is "We Cut Heads." So sometimes I say Slam Nuba. We cut heads? People say we cut heads. That's just how it doesn't mean that we're gonna. It's not gonna happen. We just kind of pride ourselves on doing poetry that severs people from their senses, thus cutting their head off. For the longest while, this city has done a fantastic job in the slam poetry sector of representing ourselves very well nationally. Whether that means that we go to some of the largest poetry gatherings in the world and bring back trophies, and on the adult front and soon to be on the collegiate front and our youth front. We've done a fantastic job of that for a long time. I think what that means, what comes along with that, I think for us is a responsibility to make sure that we represent the voice of our city a lot and very well. And maybe as you guys kind of heard in my Blacklight poem, I say to kids a lot when I work in classrooms, nobody's going to write your story, only you are. And so I feel like we find our positioning really well in the city of Denver is trying to be the voice of the city. And that does not mean just talking about the mountains and the Broncos. Right? Yeah. The elephant or the giant bear or that giant horse at the end. One of those things. We definitely really try to aggressively handle a lot of issues that are happening right in front of us. In my team this last year, we handled all of our new passings with marijuana, and how like people have like sort of seen Denver as like this like stoner city, and we're like, yo, like that's not all that exists here, right? On several fronts, you know, whether it's us talking about the major gentrification that's happening right around us. Every second Friday of the month, we have a poetry slam at the Crossroads Theater off 27th in Wilton. And then the following Saturday, we run a breakfast program called Poetry and Pancakes, where our featured artists and residents will come teach a workshop amidst a delicious pancake breakfast made by me. I think that what I've noticed in this is, it makes me think of this. When I first took over Slam Nuba in 2011, there was always a homeless gentleman who would be sitting outside of our venue, right? And he'd lay out this table and he'd always sell these goods, right? Like, you know, and it'd be the most random things ever. Like I bought like a Deep Rock water cooler from this gentleman one day. The most random things, he would just start with this collection. And one day I sat down and started talking to him. He said, you know what, man? I really like to sing. And homeboy could sing, right? And it blew my mind, right? This dude who was just always trying to make a buck outside of the venue all the time came into our venue and cased out our stage. And I realized that, like, this is the city breathing. Like, so often we are stepping over these voices. Just like you said, right? We're coming into these neighborhoods and we're thinking that we have to, like, create something brand new rather than fostering what's already there. And I take a lot of pride in our organization trying to be one of the last remnants of 5 Points that will continue for a long time. When they decide that the name 5 Points is too much of a negative connotation, when they call us like the Village Points or something like that. When they make choice decisions with us and how that is, like I will continue to shout, "We cut heads to the mountains." That we're gonna carry these stories, and you're not gonna forget us. You're not going to forget us. If you want to remember where Denver was, you go into the top floor of the Blair Caldwell Library, and you remember what 5 Points is. You can come into Slam Nuba, into our fantastic poetry reading, and get a good sense of what was there as well. So,
So my name is Brian Corrigan, and I'm the founder and director of Oh Heck Yeah, which happened this summer, which was an interactive street arcade on Champa Street. And just wondering how many of you in the room went to Oh Heck Yeah. Awesome, that's pretty good. So Oh Heck Yeah, like I said, is an interactive, it's a first of its kind interactive street arcade. It happened on Champa Street, and we used the Denver Theater District's LED screens at 16th and Champa, 15th and Champa, and 14th and Champa. And we built out all brand new custom video games, and the games were developed by local developers. We had the Colorado Symphony actually record a custom score. I see Laura over there in Jackson, so the Symphony was one of our partners. And the whole idea was really to use the power of play to connect people on the street. So you wonder why connection is so important and why we need to connect people on the street. Well, connection is important because it makes your street safer, it makes your community more resilient, and I would argue that connection on the street always used to be a part of the street, but for whatever reason, all of that kind of good stuff has really been sucked out, and we don't really have that kind of random interaction that happens anymore. And so that's really kind of the goal of Oh Heck Yeah, is to make that happen.
Well, hi. This is so exciting to see all of you here. I'm Jami Duffy. I'm the Executive Director of Youth on Record. So who has heard of Youth on Record or flowbots.org? Nice. Good. So essentially, for those of you who haven't, Youth on Record, we're in our 7th year, and we are now the largest music provider for all of Denver Public Schools. What really sets Youth on Record apart is our teachers. So who our teachers are professional working musicians in the state of Colorado who go into the most at-risk and underserved high schools in Denver and teach class. And they're teaching music production class, spoken word poetry, slam poetry, music fundamentals. And the reason that Youth on Record really seems to be working is A, because these teachers are absolutely incredibly dynamic and well-known within the city. So they're not just, good people who are trying to be musicians, which is sweet, but they're like really, really good musicians. And they're putting out albums, they're in the recording studio, they're touring. And so there's something about that connection that they're making with the kids that's really working. And I think that's because anytime you're gonna run an arts program, speaking of numbers, you live them, I live them too. The Wallace Foundation just came out with a study that said that the #1 indicator of a successful arts program is to employ artists. Not people who are pretending that they know how to paint, right? Not people who are playing at being a music teacher, the same way that we shouldn't be hiring teachers to teach math who haven't studied that, right? So that's working really, really well. Long story short, what people don't realize is Denver is an absolutely incredible city. And I couldn't be prouder. I'm a 5th generation native. I couldn't be prouder of what's, yay. Thank you. I couldn't be prouder of what's going on. A lot of natives get a little bit like curmudgeon-y about you. But I sort of dig you, and I'm glad you're here. So I'm thrilled about what's going on here. But what people don't realize is the high school graduation rate in Denver is 51%. Yes, say that again. Shocking. It's absolutely mind-blowing. In the neighborhood where we just built our $2 million youth facility, in partnership with the Denver Housing Authority, the high school graduation rate, you guys, this is a mile from downtown Denver. You can see practically the Broncos, playing from our neighborhood, and the high school graduation rate is 12%. So if we are really, really invested in making this the world-class city that we all want to be a part of, we have to address that. And it is my firm belief that art for art's sake, as lovely as it is, doesn't make sense anymore. I believe that the arts can address the world's most pressing issues. One example of that is Youth on Record. We've got these musicians who are doing it every day, and consequently, it's raised the bar for their own art. So they're becoming better musicians. They're collaborating with their co-teachers that they never would have worked with before, because essentially they're in their field. So I think that Youth on Record, I'm thrilled to be a part of it, thrilled to be at the helm. I think it is one example of what we can do as a community with the arts to really make this the kind of city that we can all be proud of. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.